Meet the army of robots coming to fill in for scarce workers. Robots are spreading at a record pace from their traditional strongholds, like making automobiles, into nearly every other human endeavor. That's the headline. Boston Dynamics four-wheeled stretch robot can unload boxes from shipping containers or trucks. A new wave of robots is arriving, and in a world short of workers, business leaders are more eager to welcome them than ever. A combination of hard-pressed employers, technological leaps, and improved cost efficiencies has fueled a rapid expansion of the world's robot army. 500,000 industrial robots were installed globally last year. 500,000. According to data released Thursday by a trade group called International Federation of Robotics, an all-time high exceeding the previous record set in 2018 by 22%.
I had my food delivered by a robot in a restaurant about 2 weeks ago. And I actually thought it was pretty cool. It was a very, primitive robot, more or less just sort of a self-driving robot with racks on it for dishes and, little eyes so it could tell where it was going. But it was I thought, of course, I'm a tech person, but I thought it was a better experience than watching a waitress juggle all the plates and, try not to drop anything.
Hmm. I just put the link at the top of the room. There's a chart that shows robot growth each year. And boy, was 2021 a record year, like by far, by 20% more than any other year. Annual
COVID helped
number
it, I
of
think.
industrial robot installations. So for the past 5 years, there's been about 400,000 being installed per year. Last year was 500,000. So an uptick of 20%, an extra
Well,
100,000.
this is not, mine wasn't an industrial robot. It was more like a commercial robot. But still, it's the same theory. It's a low wage job that they couldn't find enough workers for, and they replaced it with a robot.
Uh,
I
Evan
predict,
also shared one, right? Tyler, did you see that Lawson in Japan? They hired the people and then they do orientation to teach them how to work remotely via their avatar, so they don't even have to go to the convenience store anymore.
oh wow. So the convenience store staff is no longer
Lawson,
in the
yeah,
store.
yeah. For the Shinusha for the new staff, they have doing their orientation now to work via their avatar.
That's another huge trend that's developing, which is you walk into an office of some kind and the receptionist is on a screen, can see you as you're walking before you even open the front door, and is working remotely from Romania for $500 a month and is has a far better education than the person they could hire for 10 times that. You know, why wouldn't that scale exponentially? So get ready for service people remotely on a big screen, human size. So they'll look like their head is the same size like it would be if a human was sitting there, but they'll be talking to you remotely, but they'll be able to see in everything that you're doing. So you could have
There
hotel.
haven't been, yeah, there haven't been front office people in offices in Phoenix for at least the last 5 years, and there aren't many front desk people in hotels anymore.
I'm curious about US though. If robot is the one serving you, do you still have to tip it?
I would say not. Um,
Right?
I don't.
in
Yeah.
Thailand, the cleaning robots um, that are quite large, they're like large cleaning robots, are quite prevalent, starting to be quite prevalent in hotels in Thailand. And so are the ones similar to what Dr. Francine was describing, like a server, which is kind of roaming around with trays and actually can hold like 3 or 4 trays full of stuff. And I'm starting to see I saw one just 2 days ago in a supermarket. It was like it really caught your eye because it comes up to you and shows you what it's has on offer to buy, and you can't ignore it. Um, so it's kind of a brilliant marketing thing. Anyway, but the fact that robots are happening at all in Thailand, where labor is ridiculously cheap on the low end, like $10 a day is a very, very, very normal salary for a Thai person. So the fact that they're willing to hire robots to do what you could hire a human to do for $10 a day. What about in Scandinavia, where people are making $150 a day on at McDonald's on the low end? So yeah, uh, get ready. As I've been saying for months, like this is just picking. This is just getting started. Where it goes from here is very simple. The robotic arms are getting the price is dropped as these numbers scale up. The prices drop dramatically, just like your old flat screen TV did, or your computer, or whatever, any piece of technology you ever bought. The price is going to drop tremendously as they reach mass scale here. And the arms traditionally were in the tens of thousands of dollars. Now they're into the single digit thousands of dollars, about $5,000 for a robotic arm. The robotic arm is going to drop to under $1,000. And when that happens, the other piece of the equation is the ease of programmability of that robotic arm, which is happening by some startup called the Google, a really strange name, like a Google or something like that. They even have their own new like mini headquarters for this, writing the operating system, like Android for your smartphone. They want to be the operating system for these robotic arms for reasons I'll let you imagine. That's sweet, sweet, juicy data. So if they can program the arms, and they will, and they'll make it very simple, and they'll make it crazy, 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 crazy simple. And then you'll be able to buy a robotic arm for $1,000 and program it to be a barista, and then, or make it. It can make lemonade, and you can put it in your front yard and sell lemonade on the weekends. That's coming
before or before or after universal basic income?
simultaneously. I think the same weekend, in fact.
I think that's what the future is going to look like. Many jobs, especially in the United States, we do have a shortage of skilled workers. And at the opening or the presenting ceremony of Optimus, I just watched the entire presentation. There were discussions after that how robots are going to be replacing the jobs of factory workers. Robots would be replacing the jobs perhaps of dispatchers, packers. I mean, there are so many small or big jobs that the robot can be replaced for, because the idea is to expedite the production for the company to run manufacturing 24/7. And robots don't need to take a break, and they are, faster, and I think less prone to make mistakes. There's so many aspects of human labor that robots kind of solve the problems for the manufacturers and the companies. But at the same time, what is going to happen to these people uh, if the jobs are taken by robots?
Farmers,
If there is no universal basic income, um, you know
they're going to go back
robots are.
to what we do in the developing world, which is become farmers. They're going to grow their own food
It,
off the grid with their own water and their own food on their own land and build their own house. And they're
just
going to
just
live.
one point. I think
Yeah,
many of you have the wrong conception, wrong idea that robots doesn't need a break. Robot, of course, they need a break. Automation and robotics, they need to do preventive measurements. Sometimes they break down, they shut down. So actually, they still need engineers. So what I'm saying is, the blue collars will be replaced by the white collar. Will have more jobs. I mean, you have to use more brains than to use manual.
yeah. Cheryl knows because in even in Tokyo, which is the epicenter of robots and has been from the very beginning, where there's been robotic sushi restaurants for as long as we can remember, and they do break down. And your favorite sushi restaurant does from time to time have outages with the conveyor belts and the robotic sushi chef and everything else. It's not uncommon. It's not super common, but it's not at all uncommon that they have those outages and downages and anyway. So the non-tech news: Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, attacked by kamikaze drones. At least 8 people were killed in attacks across the country, including in the capital. And a government living hour by hour. BBC is reporting. BBC is from the UK, and they're reporting 2 hours ago that the new Liz Truss's government is living hour by hour. The program for government is dead. This is hand-to-mouth government living hour by hour. So it might not make it through the night. And okay, those are your non-tech news for now.
Tyler,
Yeah.
something that's interesting about that is it seems like Iran and Belarus are involved as well. They were Iranian drones, I believe.
Really? That's it. Yeah, there we go. That's interesting. That goes back to the triad of Russia, China, Iran as the core of the opposing New World Order. Oh, there was another interesting one. Super interesting. Hold on. Asia, China, currency. There was a story about. Here it is. There it is. Found it. South China Morning Post. Here it comes. And again, this is rather tech news, but it's geopolitical, what have you. Here we go. Pinning it now. There it is. The headline says, from South China Morning Post, based out of Hong Kong, China sets sights on greater yuan use in ASEAN. ASEAN is the Asian brotherhood or sisterhood of Southeast Asian countries like Myanmar, which has kind of been kicked out to a degree. It's kind of been in the ice box. It's in the penalty box for the time being. Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Southeast Asia. Think Southeast Asia. And it's called the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, kind of appropriately named, has surpassed the EU and the US to become China's largest trading partner. Because, by the way, Thailand has about 100 million people, Vietnam has 100 million people. You get the idea. Indonesia is the 4th biggest country on the planet. So people don't have a real good grasp for how big Southeast Asia is. It's far bigger than Europe. It's quite bigger than the U.S. And yet it's thought of as this little kind of quiet corner of Asia. Because India is so big next door, it makes sense. I don't blame people that they don't realize that it's bigger than the EU or the US. Anyway, People's Bank of China plans to promote direct trading while supporting overseas economies and developing yuan foreign exchange markets. So what they're saying is there's an upcoming ASEAN meeting, and I believe it's happening in Bangkok. In fact, I'm almost certain it is. And China will be there, and China's biggest agenda at the annual meeting is to promote their currency, that they do trade in their currency. Gee, I wonder why. And you better believe the U.S. is meeting with all of these countries and telling them, whatever you do, don't trade in China's currency. The yuan is certainly much more international. Anyway, so that's a story worth watching, because honestly, this is what is in my crazy conspiracy theory, although I'm certainly not the only one, and I'm incredibly confident I'll be proven correctly. The gist behind the tensions. Why is the U.S. stopping China on semiconductors, for example? And we just read how they're now going to ban every American from working there, and it will continue. We read these headlines every day, and they are continuing, and they are escalating, and they will continue to escalate until China collapses. That's the goal. Make no mistake about it. And why is the US hell bent on collapsing China at this moment? Because China is trying to offer the world an alternative to the US dollar. That's precisely why. China really hasn't really done anything that really directly threatened or upset the US, particularly aside from that. Honestly, that is really America's kryptonite. Is when a country tries to do that. Just ask Libya. Just ask, just ask Gaddafi. If you can hold a seance to get in touch with him, he would assure you that the biggest mistake he ever made was fucking with the dollar. So Russia similarly is part of this scheme with Iran, and yeah, gee, what a coincidence that Iran and Russia are having some interesting difficulties these days. They're having a difficulty manifesting their agenda of getting the world off the dollar at the moment. Gee, I wonder why. So, yes, our Southeast Asian neighbors are going to be consulted with about the challenges of adopting the Chinese yuan. Anyway, but China's going to say, "Hey, well, I'm your biggest trading partner, and I want to trade with you in this currency." And the U.S. is going to say, "You better not do that," and because we're your biggest, kind of military ally, and the Chinese are your biggest trading partner, and it puts Southeast Asia collectively in a sticky situation. Anywho, so that's the perspective from Southeast Asia. So now we can go into the big tech headlines, and we do the air horn and that whole jazz. And here we go. Here we go. So the top story today is that Parler, which is the Twitter clone that was born when, if I recall correctly, when Trump got evicted from Twitter or banned from Twitter, this gave rise to Parler because the idea was, well, we'll make a Twitter clone, and then they found out that they couldn't be hosted on AWS because AWS wouldn't host them. They had to make their own cloud, and Russia hosted it and everything. It's a whole crazy scenario. Anyway, but here's Parler's back in the news because Parler says it has agreed to be sold to or acquired by Kanye West to create an uncancelable ecosystem, with the deal expected to close in the next 2 months. So because he's being banned, because Kanye is being banned of sorts from Twitter, because of his rather unflattering, to put it mildly, I'm being a bit trying to make light of Kanye's very peculiar anti-Semitic kind of posture as of late, and so he's finding himself, although it might be some bizarre performance art that he's participating in. The jury is still out about what is going on in the brain of Kanye West with regard to this kind of anti-Jewish narrative he's drumming up. Some are assuming it's to prepare him to run as Trump's running mate or something like this, and who knows? There's all kinds of conspiracy theories going on about this. Anyway, so he certainly knows how to keep his name in the media. He and Trump have that in common. So anyway, strange development on that one. Next up, Nikkei Asia.
Did Parler did
Yeah,
Parler ever really amount to anything? Even
no,
after like it didn't, right?
no, I would say no, not at all. I would say not at all. I think it went poof in the, it was a nothing.
Right.
Yeah, I think he, you know, I mean, if we take it at face value and just kind of analyze it as a layperson, he ostensibly, the code is written, it works like Twitter, maybe it was managed poorly, whatever else. Kanye thinks he can bring, I don't know what, the black community to Parler. Is that his vision, or I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see him try.
He doesn't even have kind of like a uniform support
Right,
even among blacks because of
right.
even comments he made a couple of years ago. So yeah, about blacks, not about
Right.
Jews. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's weird. It's one of those with artists. Nothing is ever as it seems, um, and you can't take the normal business logic approach to analyzing us. It's not this. You can't analyze this from a CNBC perspective when you're dealing with somebody who's clearly far down the artist end of the spectrum, who's doing things for kind of not non-traditional business reasons. We can perhaps we don't know. We'll find out.
Well, no, no. I think you're making a good point because I've been in a lot of rooms. Everyone's talking about this thing, and I think people give it too much attention because he's very far, like on a spectrum. He's very far on the artist side. You do have some celebrities who are kind of well versed in other issues. I wouldn't put him in that category.
Right.
I mean, I would just put him in the artist category, and then, people are not
Yeah.
necessarily going to follow him just because they like his music.
Right. Right. Well, he would say he's more than an artist. He would say he's like a culture uh, shaper, and in that sense, that's where social media and tech and art all kind of converge is around culture. And if he feels like who knows, he might. It could be a delusion of grandeur moment where he's gonna, like Trump, realize he doesn't quite
Do,
have the social influence.
do you know of a single situation in previous generations where, let's say, somebody followed a designer, or something like that, like whether it was Calvin Klein or whomever,
Right.
or Ralph Lauren. I mean, usually they didn't get involved with these types of issues, but I mean, I don't know of a single situation where someone, even if they were good at selling, let's say apparel, that people were following them about social and political issues,
Well, I'll debate
yeah.
you on. I'll debate you on that. I can't point. I wouldn't point to one particular artist, but music as an artistic genre um, has historically. You have artists, collectives of musicians like the punk movement or the folk hippie movement, who collectively gave a sense of identity and conformity and uniformity of cohesion amongst um, segments of the population, and that music culturally played a significant role through parts of the 60s and 70s and 80s, and I think it's losing that role, sadly. And social media is kind of replacing it, and fashion kind of rode on the coattails of music's abilities to kind of, because when you have the hippies and the punks, of course, there is a fashion that goes along with that. So I don't mean to belittle it, but I really feel like for whatever reason, music as opposed to poetry or as opposed to performance art, although comedians I think deserve quite a bit of credit. Some of them, George Carlin, very much so, and Bill Hicks, and I think some of these people deserve incredible amount of respect for their ability to kind of shape uh,
Yeah,
people's.
but how did music lead, or did music follow, or music kind of reflected where society was going? So you look at like the anti-Vietnam movement. I,
Yeah,
I don't believe that it was only there because of music.
yeah,
I think that it was it was percolating on its own, right?
yeah. But just to analyze the role of music in that instance, when I think you're right, I think it's concurrent. I don't think it follows or leads. I think what it does is there will be moments where there's a collective um, disconnect. There's a collective. There will be people who have a shared perspective, and they don't realize they share that perspective until there's a song that unifies everybody in the realization that they all share this, what they thought was an independent perspective, and it's actually a massive collective perspective, and it gives credence to the idea that people aren't having this idea independently or alone. That um, So I feel like music has a unique power to do that, and so that I feel like it's the people were there, they had their own feelings, and how do we get people to understand that there's actually a lot of people all on the same page that are unhappy about a particular way society is going. It used to be music was the unifier pre social networks, and now that social networks can do that far better than music can, for more immediately, I would say, then that's why music is no longer needed to do that anymore. That's why we don't really need musicians addressing what's going on in politics in the past 10 years, like we previously kind of expected them to, perhaps. And comedians.
Tyler, this
Yeah.
is Irvin.
Hey, Irvin.
Ty- Tyler, one of the things bringing this up, I think that all of us of a certain age remember Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On"
Oh, you
and
nailed it. You nailed it.
how that it amplified what was going on in the nation, even though things were already happening before that album came out. But it just gave a louder voice and intensity to what was going on. And if you look at early rap, it did the same thing. It spoke of the social injustice that these kids were going through, and somewhere along there, it got really messed up. But I'm just saying that music, I still think music has a place. I just don't think that the some of the artists out there right now understand how to voice that in music, because I don't think they're really placed inside of what's going on inside of their communities. And so they aren't giving voice. It's about the dollar at this point for social media. It's not about, especially in the entertainment area, it's not about having a social voice. It's about making the money. As far as I see it, that's my uh, observation at this point. But what's going on was definitely a vehicle that intensified the voice of what was going on in the country at the time.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that perfect example to mind. Yeah. I mean, even John Lennon really got, went post be even there's some minor instances where the Beatles themselves kind of dabbled in that and whatnot. But you know, anyway. So the next story is Nikkei Japan has sources that Apple freezes plans to use memory chips from China's YMTC in its products, including iPhones, following the latest U.S. export restrictions. There we go. Did I mention we see a lot of these headlines, and we're gonna continue to see lots of these headlines about this grand decoupling of the U.S. and China, particularly focused around the tech and semiconductor space of things. This is just today's. There will be another one tomorrow. I guarantee it. Company previously planned to put Chinese-made memory in some iPhones, meaning Apple, and now they're not going to. Gee, I wonder why. Why? What's the problem with using Chinese memory in your phones, Apple? So there's people tweeting about that. Here's one from Dare Abasanjo. He says an escalating trade war with China will deepen inflation and companies take more expansive paths to getting components and addressing markets and multiple industries shrinks, causing price increases to address shortfalls. Globalization's end will hurt a lot. Yes, the last sentence is the most spot on of that. Yes, there is. We're at the end of globalization, and it's shifting to the a banning of China kind of outright, and it is going to hurt in the short term, and then those chips will come to other places where it can be made just as cheaply, actually. And Vietnam and India jumped to mind, and Thailand was just announced that they're going to be making Apple stuff, and yeah, it is going to be more expensive in the short term. It will have a little bit more inflation in the meantime, and if you really want to do the deep dive on how the world's really going to change as a result of this great divorce going on between Uncle Sam and Uncle Xi, the Disunited Nations, Peter Zeihan, is perhaps the best book to read on the topic, who it it makes no bones about it. It's going to be very painful for some countries, particularly Germany is going to be particularly pained by this divorce, believe it or not. And he goes into great details as to why. Um, Anywho, next up, Meta says it found an externally created Meta workplace account that was used to spoof an internal Instagram system used as evidence for The Wire's reporting. Oh, that's interesting. Because The Wire was doing a story last week about Meta and the what is Meta called? Oh, the Meta workplace. And so now Meta says that a non-Meta account was spoofing The Wire and feeding it false information of sorts. And so Meta came out with a post that Cheryl just pinned at the top of the room that says what The Wire reports got wrong. And here's why it got it wrong, because it was using sources that weren't actual Meta sources, but were fake spoofing sources and whatnot. So the drama continues. This is an ongoing investigation, and we will update as it unfolds. At this time, we can confirm that the video shared with The Wire that purports to show an internal Instagram system, in fact, depicts an externally created account that was deliberately set up with Instagram's name and brand insignia in order to deceive people. We have located the workplace account in question and found that it was created on October 13th after The Wire's news reports were initially published. The account was set up externally as a free trial account under the name Instagram and using the Instagram brand as its official picture. It is not an internal account. Two articles published by The Wire allege that a user whose account is cross-checked can influence content decisions on Instagram without any review. Our cross-check system was built to prevent potential over-enforcement mistakes and to double-check cases where our decision could require more understanding. To be clear, our cross-check program does not grant enrolled accounts the power to automatically have content removed from our platform. So there you go. Facebook pushing back there. And then does The Wire respond? They do. It says, statement by The Wire on Meta's responses so far. By repeatedly making wild claims about The Wire's evidence, the company hopes we will feel obliged to seek and publish further information that could be more easily tracked back to our sources. We are not prepared to play this game any further. To be continued. And as Casey Newton says on Twitter, this is rapidly becoming one of the strangest tech journalism stories in recent memory. Yeah, it is. It is a weird one. Okay, next up, MasterCard partners with Paxos for a program that let financial institutions offer cryptocurrency trading to their clients. MasterCard is launching a program to let financial institutions offer cryptocurrency trading. Payments giant will act as a bridge. There you go. That's MasterCard. Next, many big U.S. property managers use an app called RealPage's Yield Star software to set rent prices, raising questions about potential collusion and violation of federal law. Yeah, that's interesting. If they're working in the back, where you have these massively well-funded entities, um, potentially, uh, uh, um, um, what kind of banks am I thinking of, Ken? Investment banks that are, kind of playing real estate like it's Wall Street, where they're buying up an incredible amount of real estate across the US, which they have done, which has made the prices go sky high. And if they are colluding in the back end and they're all using the same app, this Real Pages Yield Star, and it gives them the ability to share data with each other between banks, between bankers and agents and whatnot, and they decide to keep because what's supposed to happen right now is when the interest rates go up, uh, they stop focusing on real estate and go back to other investment vehicles. And then there should be a bit of a cooling off in the real estate market and in the rental market. But if they collude and work together to share data to keep the rents high, because this app of platform, for lack of a better word, enables them to do that, then you might get some Capitol Hill action asking for some Senate hearings to investigate to what degree these real estate portfolio managers, property managers, are colluding in keeping the uh, rental rate, you know, artificially high because no one, they're talking all their friends away from lowering the rates.
Yeah, but Tyler, I think if this is even happening, what it's doing is just providing more transparency to property owners about what's going on in the market, as opposed to just they're just using data, making database decisions rather than off the top of their heads. But the biggest reason that rents are going up is that we have a housing shortage in this country. We don't have enough units, and that's that and depending on and it's very regional, as you know, also. So if you were to build somehow, theoretically, if you build more units, that it would have more of an impact on what happens with rents than someone has an algorithm. But we just happen to have a shortage of housing. And the interesting thing about the investment banks. I mean, it really wasn't investment banks, but even though it's like Blackstone and an offshoot of Blackstone, like buying single family homes, and so people can't buy single family homes anymore, or it's harder because the investor community was buying it. Eventually Wall Street money into this sector, particularly in single family homes, probably should create more single family homes, because now builders, have another outlet to sell to. Okay, other than individuals, they have another. If you're Toll Brothers or somebody else, or Ryland Homes, whoever the builders are, you can say, "Hey, I can build these homes and sell them to innovation. I don't have to worry about there won't be individual buyers." So eventually it will sort itself out. But for a while there was some dislocation, and 2008 created a lot of dislocation, and we're still we're working through that. So, um, yeah, but like anything else, by the way, the biggest concern I would have is not the algorithm. It would be the other thing the article mentions, which is the concentration of certain property owners. Like whether it's these new companies that own all the single family homes, or a couple of major companies that own many of the apartment complexes. That creates its own problem, whether there's an algorithm or not. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, but isn't the housing crisis in China going to exacerbate this problem? Like they have their all their mortgages might go belly up soon, and in Canada, there's been early indications that hey, look, now there's all these vacancies. Now people are selling their homes for 40% under asking price. So at least in Canada here, there's some rumblings of instability.
I always do. I mean, if you're in Canada, you may have a better sense than I do. I always view the Canadian housing market as more stable than the American one, simply because of the way that Canada does mortgages. They have the more adjustable rate mortgages, and they people tend not to have 30-year fixed and other stuff. And Canada actually avoided a lot of the problems that we went through in 2008. So I always kind of envied the Canadian market as being like a little bit more stable than the American one, but maybe you have a different opinion.
Yeah, slightly different just because of, I think, a lot of foreign investors have actually entered the market. So Canada actually legislated a specific foreign investor tax, and it was quite high in some places, and it did not disincentivize people from investing in property here. So here, there's some homes, like just down the street from here, the homes cost more than the homes do in La Jolla, which is stupid because this is not like La Jolla here near Toronto. So it's very confusing and very counterintuitive. So I was curious if anyone had any commentary on those parameters, but thanks, Ken.
Yeah, but Eric,
Um,
I'm assuming that's only like in Toronto and British Columbia. You have that situation. I mean, you don't have foreign investment in Saskatchewan, do you?
We don't even have it even in Toronto. So, I mean, in Ottawa. I lived most of my life in Ottawa, and we don't really have that much of foreign investors. And like you said, I did. I did part of my first degree in Vancouver. It's mostly in Vancouver. A lot of the foreign investors, especially from Asia, is in Vancouver. There is a huge Chinese community as well as the Indian community, and in Toronto as well, but not other parts of Canada. And I think the other part that makes the Canadian real estate market a bit stable is also we don't have this zero down payment, even though there are some, mortgage companies and brokers, they try to do that. But in general, in most markets, that there is no, like, you have to have the home buyers insurance, that's a requirement. And then in most markets, at least you have to have like 5% to 10% down payment that you have to do before buying houses. So in my case, we had to put even more. It was I think close to the 2008 crash, so it was it was much more stringent. So I think those measures makes it a bit more stable. And the other thing I was gonna mention very quickly is I actually was reading an article yesterday that it was saying in the U.S. the housing market in most of them seem to be like 20% overvalued, and that there it could be coming pretty soon because of, like, I think during COVID and even right after that, that they have been selling for cash, and just prices skyrocketing. That has nothing to do with the value of the market, but because people were just buying to get out of cities. And now they have been saying that they really do expect that in most markets there could be a really, really downward pricing, as much as up to 20% of housing values of houses coming soon. At least that's what I read.
That is correct. In addition to what Ken said earlier, it's a compound issue. The rents are going up not only because of the algorithm, but also because of the lack of the number of the houses available, depending on the market or the region where you're looking at. In southern states, after the hurricane season, when there is a lot of damage to properties, housing becomes, not freely accessible because a lot of damage prevents not only, the new buildings from, their schedule of building kind of slows down, and they start running behind on the schedule, a lack of supplies, lack of labor. Because of many different reasons, labor shortage caused the price of construction go down. Construction or repair is also very elevated. So homeowners or landlords who are maintaining properties now have to pay extra amount of money, and all of that plus a lot more of these costs are going to get absorbed in the rent anyway. Plus going the Feds raising the rates, all the mortgages, the mortgage payments going up depending on what kind of mortgage you have, and the impact of movement of certain areas and regions, like especially in south, a large influx of population from the northern states here also created kind of a shortage bubble for the houses, so the rent went up just because of the competition. But the situation, I'm not sure, is going to settle down a little bit because the pricing of the houses are coming down. Housing are staying longer on market on average, and that's why you see the slashes in prices, 10, 20, 70,000 below the asking price. But how's that going to reflect on the uh, rental market? I'm not sure. But unless the supply chain issues and the worker shortage issues are resolved, the rent will continue to go up because those expenditures are then transferred to the renters.
Okay, moving right along. Um, Reuters is doing a piece on CZ, the boss of Binance, and how he and other executives at Binance were working to insulate Binance from scrutiny by authorities in the US and UK. And BBC is doing a piece on how Ukraine uses memes and jokes and funny videos in its social media war with Russia, which helped the Defense Ministry's Twitter account grow to 1.5 million followers. And the Mexican Attorney General says it is investigating a $23 million purchase of Pegasus by the prior administration and whether the NSO sold it legally to Mexico. And Ambi Robotics, which is developing AI powered robots for warehouses, raises $32 million. And raised 32 from Tiger Global, bringing a total of funding to 67 million. Did I mention these robots were about to go into serious tipping point mode? It's the convergence of lowering of price, development, the ease of use, the rising cost of manual human labor, and all of these things is going to kick off. And when this shit goes fast, it's going to go like smartphones. Like when smartphones hit a tipping point, and all of a sudden everybody you know got a smartphone. Watch out! It's not going to be quite exactly that dramatic, but not so far off. You're going to have a lot of businesses using robotic arms for things as soon as they get under $1,000 and easy to program. The next is 14 self-driving vehicle companies that IPO'd in the past 2 years have seen an 80% average decline in their post-IPO stock price. TechCrunch says Elon Musk and governments should stop finger pointing, commit to transparency, and figure out a long-term funding plan for Starlink in Ukraine. And then the Wall Street Journal article that I started today off with about new U.S. export controls may affect senior executives at public chip companies in China, forcing them to choose between their U.S. citizenship and their jobs in China. Wired has a piece. The headline says, holding platforms accountable for algorithms that promote self-harm. It's hard because research linking mental health and social media doesn't establish causation. You got to admire the Wired not falling for the anti-big tech meme and sticking with, actually trying to earnestly figure out, understanding there's a problem and wanting to fix it, but you can really only fix real problems with real solutions and not by panicking. And kudos to Wired for an article like that. Cheryl just pinned it. When algorithms promote self harm, who is responsible? What else? The National Labor Relations Board says Apple's Penn Square store employees in Oklahoma City voted to unionize, counting 56 votes in favor and 32 against out of 95 employees. There you go. So you're starting to Apple retail store team members voting to unionize there. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens to those folks. So those are the big boring headlines for today, and now we can turn it to the tweets. Did anyone have a headline or a tweet they want to share? A lot of people are sharing, as usual. Saudamini and BB and Ken and everybody. We'll get to all of those tweets. Ken, did you have one that you want to make sure we get to today? Or we will jump in.
I'm looking up the tweets that I sent you just to see
Okay.
because it refreshed my own memory. So I'll let you know.
Okay. Okay. So here we go. In no particular order. Actually, in reverse chronological order. BB found one from Engadget. Elon Musk says SpaceX will keep paying for Ukraine's access to Starlink, and will do so indefinitely. What is it costing? $20 million a week? Did he say? Or
A month.
a month? Okay, that makes more sense. Well, God bless a private company for providing a critical piece of infrastructure to a country to keep itself from collapsing. I'm not. Is anyone else aware of a private company? I'm sure there have been, like maybe Ford did during World War II or something like that. It wouldn't surprise me, but it is an incredibly uh, interesting situation that we find ourselves in here. That a private company is essentially keeping a country from disappearing off the map.
Yeah, but other people will point out there's a way to just look at what Starlink is doing and just viewing them as a defense contractor. And like we were discussing the I'll pronounce the word wrong, but the HIMARS or HIMARS that have been very valuable for Ukraine. And the American defense contractors and other defense contractors who make that stuff, they're getting paid. Okay, so if you just view Starlink as a defense contractor, why shouldn't they get paid just like Boeing or Lockheed Martin or something?
Well,
Exactly. As a private company, they should also receive compensation. But until they don't, they are still, kind of donating the service and equipment to Ukraine and now to Iran as well. So that is commendable. I don't think any other company right now is bearing this amount of cost. I mean, the total cost that's been contributed towards Ukraine by Starlink and SpaceX.
but the cost is not clear because just we discussed last week. So UK, US, Poland, they paid partially of the devices and partial uh, service fee as well. So, but Elon explained that because of the destroys of those dishes and devices, so Starlink sent a new one to replace. So from the articles, I can tell so how much did Starlink uh, paid or cover for all this cost. So unless they can provide a more detailed ledger or the cost, we don't know if it's reasonable that Starlink provide as as discount to this military defenses. But I think the issue is just it's very different from the World War One or World War Two because right now U.S. The America is not directly uh,
What,
involved in the
like,
war,
what is the
right?
marginal cost? Is this what you're saying, BB, that once the satellite's up there, there's no marginal cost to providing the service?
No, Elon gave an amount, just we said 20 million amount, but is this reasonable? Or is this for like covering a private company's cost for all those investment?
Yeah,
So
but the controversy, I think, with this isn't so much about. I mean, because there's you could get into all sorts of issues about how we pay for military equipment, and whether it's cost plus and other direct subsidies that the U.S. government and other British government as well pays for defense contractors. I think what makes this difference, and this is the point I made in another forum, the difference between Starlink and Elon and let's say Boeing and Lockheed Martin or McDonnell Douglas back in the day or any other major Northrop, major U.S. defense contractor, is the CEOs of these companies weren't having private conversations with leaders involved in a war about how to negotiate, the end of a war. You didn't have the CEO of Boeing calling, the president of North Vietnam about like let's see how we can bring an end to the war. Elon apparently has had the direct discussions with Putin, okay, and that his kind of swagger, if you will, to just get involved in certain things where typically those CEOs didn't go, probably is why he's a lightning rod on this issue. But if he wasn't doing that, if he was simply just making stuff available, and not trying to negotiate, the his own ceasefires and truces, um, then maybe it would have you wouldn't have it would be less controversial.
Yeah, but has Elon ever not been Elon? I think that's part of the charisma, or at least part of the reason why he's achieved so much, is because he he does stand boldly for some things, and whether or not you agree with him, people talk about it. And in this case, I think he himself became a target inevitably by virtue of having those satellites up there. I imagine the conversation between somebody like Putin and Elon would have something like, well, it would be unfortunate if one of your satellites had a malfunction and collided, right? And it's very easy to imagine how if the Russians did put state-backed resources onto attacking something very targeted like that they could be effective, and that could be problematic for a company, even if it's private.
And so far, Starlink have costed 80 millions in Ukraine to SpaceX, and also Elon like mentioned that he will continue to pay for Starlink services in Ukraine. Not to mention, also not to forget that how fast the service was provided as opposed to if you go through regular contracts and the speed of the updates that were available for these satellites. Uh, so the speed really made the difference in terms of the availability of connection for the people of Ukraine, and also the signals that were not able to be jammed or were not able to be hacked by different hackers who tried to hack it. In fact, that aspect was also studied by the Defense Department, that how fast the service was available, how soon and fast the updates were able to shift the energy charging requirement, and also the signals that were not jammable by any other hacker or whatever, plus the continued support and the money that's being kind of donated by Starlink to Ukraine.
Okay. More tweets that
Sorry,
people
do
are
you
sharing.
mind if I ask a question or I had a sort of a comment to make? I find this whole episode quite interesting. So the only time I ever got a chance to speak to Elon was when I was in business school and I did a paper on space, the final business frontier. It was one of my proudest papers that I ever wrote. And I wrote it with some classmates who worked in NASA and other aerospace companies. One of the things that, it was sponsored by a retired NASA sort of head honcho at Ames. And so we got to speak to Elon. One of the things that we drew from that was, SpaceX was able to grow and innovate because they didn't live off government contracts, right? Defense contracts. So the likes of Boeing and Lockheed, part of the reason space remained expensive, and I remember this, it was $10,000 to launch a pound of material into space back in, and that stayed flat from the 1970s through to 2000s. and Elon was coming with SpaceX to try and lower that dramatically, and going after non DoD defense kind of contracts. And one of the things that was clear in that paper and talking to Elon was that these defense contractors had gotten very fat and rich off the DoD and were able to exert high prices for the space industry that was holding it back. So my question, actually, given that we know that SpaceX has definitely has a NASA contract and probably a few other space agencies, do we know prior to this whether SpaceX had any DoD contracts, any department? Because it would appear that this might be sort of moving SpaceX more into the defense industry, whether Elon likes it or not, through this Ukraine war. But maybe the DoD, maybe SpaceX isn't set up the way Boeing or Lockheed is to kind of have a ex-retired military general working as the business development for military operations, going over to Pentagon every week to say what's up. Would you need any new devices or new weapons? So I'm curious if we do, if SpaceX does have that before, or this is the first time they're getting exposed to potential defense, negotiations where where they would be paid by the military for their services.
Well, the closest thing that I'm familiar with is the 1,000 Satellites program from DARPA. Now, whether or not he pursued that government contract or decided to do it in parallel and what those details are, I don't think have been published or extensively reported on. But that would be kind of my reference, so you can check out the Voices from DARPA podcast and maybe pick up some clues there.
And each time NASA grants a contract to SpaceX, they save at least a minimum 67% of the cost for the payload, because prior to SpaceX, the Soyuz rocket, Russian rockets, were costing, like in 60s, 67% more for each load each time. And now, initially, NASA granted a couple of contracts to SpaceX, and eventually, like they grew to 5 and then 7 and 9. Now they have like multiple payloads, and even the astronauts flying through the Dragon and SpaceX flights, saving so much money, which also reduces dependency on Russian rockets. So SpaceX is kind of subsidizing, providing cheaper rocket flights with every single flight to NASA and others, which wasn't heard before. Plus, the rockets are reusable, so the drone ship catches the base load, again, and it's been reused several times. It was meant to be reused, I think, 9 times. It's already being reused 14 times, so saving money there as well. And there's so much more detail that I can get into, but this is not the room for that. But amount of money that's being saved by SpaceX is just tremendous.
No, absolutely, I agree with you. I just find it fascinating because, to enter the space industry, you can't just enter the space industry, and Elon was super brave to jump in, like whatever 15 years ago now. But there was a high barrier to entering the industry because of the military-industrial complex, right? But he broke into it, got NASA contracts. NASA also were aware that they're
Oh,
dependent on the
exactly.
Russians for this.
Initially NASA told Elon, rejected his proposal, and said that it's not even possible to make a reusable rocket. So not only it was difficult to enter, he was completely shattered by his, people who he looked up to, his role models who were very critical of him, telling him that this is not possible to make a reusable rocket, which is cheaper, lighter, and so many other
Yeah, so
factors.
I don't want to. I don't know about the reusable rocket, but I will say that this project I worked on at business school at Stanford was sponsored by Ames to try and find commercial opportunities, because there were other players in the ecosystem, as we know. Jeff Bezos with his company, and there's even a guy in Vegas, actually, I've forgotten his name, Bigelow Aerospace. Does that ring a bell to anyone? Maybe Ken, you've heard of this guy. he tried to do some sort of space venture. So NASA was encouraging competition from the commercial space. So it's not like NASA didn't want these players coming in. It's just that Elon won. And of course, the bar is high because, of course, you have to go through all the
No,
failures
no,
and
they
multiple
specifically
rocket
testified
launches.
against him. Famous NASA astronauts testified against Elon, and then Elon was interviewed about this, became very emotional, and the interviewer asked him, like, how does it feel that your heroes said that you couldn't do it or whatnot? So it's actually much more like messed up in
Yeah,
terms
of
of
course,
how the
it's a
politics worked out.
complicated
So he
organ.
didn't just
It's
win
yeah,
the first
yeah.
shot; he had to fight, he had to sue the
No,
government. There's a
absolutely.
lot of things.
No,
Actually,
I'm agreeing with all of you on that. I'm
but
just saying that
from
Elon
that one
has
point,
managed to get to where he has now, which is he has these NASA contracts. He is operating in space. He's fought the hard fight of being an entrepreneur who's been beat down, but it's not like NASA didn't ever want commercial approaches to space. I know they wanted that. I mean, that's why they were coming to business schools to help encourage people to look at different ways. And there are many players who are trying to get into this industry. It wasn't just Elon. But I mean, just to get to my point, I find it fascinating because now I think Elon might be playing a game where he's probably going to be able to, the position is at, potentially get more government contracts from DoD, even though that's where he didn't get his start. Like he was shunned upon,
no, there,
or
there
even he
are no
blamed that
there are
industry,
no games. There's no
for
games.
keeping space. Let me finish, guys. I don't speak that much. um, I think he's been shunned before, but now he's in a position to maybe leverage this Starlink kind of dependency that Ukraine have to maybe open a door to get to actually kind of because I mean Starlink was never, as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong, never intended to be a military service or any sort of it was meant to be as far as I'm aware a direct to consumer cheaper way to do internet in remote areas. But now it's looking like it's becoming a vital piece of the battlefield theater. And it's really fascinating because even on Twitter he talks about how look at my Starlink, it cannot be jammed. Is that just a fluke in the design that it cannot be jammed with others, or was it built in intentionally so that Elon is trying to demonstrate that look, I can build something that you can use in defense industry. Look at me, and then kind of trying to dangle this. Hey, there's a bill to be paid potentially, and kind of playing these games, and maybe at some point the DoD will be like, you know what, Elon, welcome to the club. You're not part of the military-industrial complex. Here's a big contract for another war, or continuing the kind of the helping the Ukrainians fight here.
Well, I thought because of the DoD contracts that he is involved with, he kind of alluded to this, that when he did smoke weed on Joe Rogan podcast, not only did he have to do a drug test, everyone at SpaceX had to do drug tests because the government was like, okay, well, if you want to play ball, this is how you play ball. So there's definitely some rules when you're involved with the Pentagon or somehow interfacing with the Department of Defense that, hey, why would a company have to do random drug tests, right? So
As far as the jamming part is concerned, Starlink and all the engineers, they not only test for all kind of frequencies, they actively invite hackers to try to jam or get into the system. I don't know the technological terminology, but the idea is to create a system which is not jammable or hackable, and they spend a lot of money, effort, and teams are dedicated to develop a system which is not jammable and hackable. So after the development of such a system, and they are completely updating it expeditiously as needed, if somebody uh, I think there were news by Russia that they were able to jam these satellites. So, oh, these satellites are not useful. That tweet was in response to those tweets that no, they are not jammable. It's not like he's trying to show off. It's about fighting off the misinformation that was being spread by Russia. That was the response that nobody can jam these satellites because they have worked hard on it. Second point about NASA is not handing out these contracts to him. These contracts are won by SpaceX because comparatively, nobody can do it cheaper, faster, better. That's the truth. If there is any other company that can provide same kind of services with this same kind of low cost, NASA will go with them. Nobody is, very sentimental about Elon at all. Actually, they try not to give him the contracts. They would rather give it to some other companies that they've been working with in the past. But the fact is, nobody can provide these services at this cost, and that's why he keeps winning the contract. It's not handed out to him or the company. It's not him. It's the group of people, those amazing engineers who are driving this, amazing company. And nobody's having any soft spot for Elon based on his polarizing personality. But the fact is, the way he has break into the industry and the technology that is even the new rocket right now, when they did this the engine test, 7 engine test, then the 9 engine test, and passed. That's unheard of. Artemis was crashed twice because they could not contain the hydrogen leak. And as opposed to that, look at this huge rocket. SpaceX was, I don't want to go into the detail, but no, there is no showing off and there's no game.
Okay, moving along. Oh, okay, moving along. Saudamini found this one. Spotify may launch a hi-fi streaming plan. Finds a Reddit user. Audio streaming service Spotify could be looking at launching the premium hi-fi service it promised more than a year ago. A Reddit user has found. And Uber Eats now delivers cannabis in
Sorry,
Canada.
Tyler, are
Yep.
they a bit late to this game? Like, Tidal, Apple Music, and others, Deezer even has a hi-fi plan. Why are they so late?
I think I I think they were waiting to see how the market responded to Tidal and Apple because they probably would. Um, it might require them to go back and renegotiate with the rights holders for a higher bit rate if the bit rates were mentioned in the contract that that what they were getting access to was for this streamable rate 96 hertz, um, and if they wanted lossless that they would have to come back to the negotiating table, and that's something they were probably not so eager to do. Potentially, that's a total guess on my part.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if they're seeing the success of the Apple. What are the headphones called? The cans,
Right.
because they
Well,
can
that's the other thing. Yeah.
carry lossless. Yeah, so those are probably taken off more than they thought, or people are
Right.
appreciating
Well,
they bought the hardware more than they thought.
that too, and the issue of the hardware necessary to take advantage of it. The headphones have existed for quite a while, making really kind of nice commercial friendly DACs, or what are called DACs, digital audio converters, that can handle the higher files. They do exist now. In fact, there's some really, really, really cool ones. I've even seen ones that will snap on the back of an iPhone with the magnetic. What do they call that?
MagSafe.
MagSafe. Thank you, Ben. There are mini DACs that can snap on the back of an iPhone. You then connect it to your phone through the Lightning port, and then you plug your high impedance studio headphones into the DAC that's now magnetically stuck on the back of your phone, and you've got a whole new level of audio experience going on. And I believe it even can, if it has battery charge, it balances the battery charge between the phone and the DAC. And anyway, so it's very cool, and the price on these things is getting very reasonable. And so now you can have a whole new level of audio fidelity and experience with minimal hassle. So it's now viable on a hardware level. So I think that might have been part of it too. I mean, these things have always existed, but they were a bit more of a headache to deal with. You needed like a rack mountable DAC, back in the day. Anyway, and they were considerably more expensive.
I actually bought an Audio Quest Cobalt, which is a DAC that I
Yeah,
use on my Android and sometimes my PC, and it does make a difference. And even my car, actually, because my car speakers are actually decent, but the what playing through the my old sort of in dash audio player isn't very good, so I use it for that as well.
yeah. And notoriously older laptops and PCs had really shitty DACs, by the way, and they're they've routinely made modest improvements over the years. But if you really want to hear music the way that artists generally intended it to be listened to in the studio, do yourself a favor and get a decent digital audio converter and a decent pair of studio headphones or speakers, because it's now no longer an economic burden to do so. And you'll be very surprised. You'll be very impressed. Um, Generally, if you're sensitive to these things to any degree, um, the music, the songs have more to them than you are used to hearing. If you're accustomed to listening to music through, MP3 files and Bluetooth earbuds, you're in for a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I'm normally. I mean, I'm a sort of closet audiophile, and I normally don't notice until I come back from a travel trip where I've been listening to just you know through my phone, just regular earbuds or MP3s or Spotify on like the lower tier. But when I get back and I have my living room and I turn it on, I'm the first few days I'm like, whoa, what have I been missing? As far as the music is concerned. Do we know anything about the pricing? Because so I actually left Spotify paid tier to the free tier so that I could try out Tidal and Apple Music. But now, if they have a competitive price for and they have a bigger library or as big as Apple, at least I'll probably ditch Tidal.
You have to be careful with the size of Spotify's library, and from what I can see, compared to Apple, in that they have a big library, but it's a very different curve. I mean, when I last looked at it, there were real holes in the Spotify library compared to Apple. Had a lot of much less known. Tyler would know more about it, but what I saw is a lot of like less known artists on Spotify and things, and some real holes in the catalog. But maybe that's a while ago. But last time I looked, it may have had as many songs in theory, but it was not the big stuff. But maybe that's different now.
Okay, are we ready here? So that was that one. Oh, Uber Eats now delivers cannabis in Canada. Makes sense. Amazing how far that's gone. And um, Apple's there's a video that was just released of Apple's immersive audio experience coming to select automobile manufacturers, namely Mercedes-Benz, is installing Apple's spatial audio system with 31 speakers and Dolby Atmos in their new models. It's the Apple operating system inside of your car, and there's a whole battle going on with between Google and Apple to be the operating system of your future car. I think Mercedes is going with Apple, not a surprise, as Steve Jobs drove a Mercedes and was very fond of Mercedes. Anyway, Saudamini found this one. Apple freezes plans to use China's memory chips. The U.S. last week added China's top memory maker and 30 other Chinese entities to a list of companies that U.S. officials have been banning. And Portugal bets all on renewables after abandoning coal as the UN steps up calls to make the switch to renewable energy to fight the global climate emergency. Portugal is among the first European Union countries to bet all in on renewables. And I'm going to go ahead, and I know that's a contentious, debatable issue, but I applaud Portugal for doing what they think is the right thing to do in this regard. And next up, Evan found one that we closed on last week. I think this was the last story on Friday of a European country has a political party led by an artificial intelligence. It's from Denmark. It's called the Synthetic Party. It's a new political party in Denmark. And It's a whole new concept for political parties.
So
So,
AI is going to decide who's good for governance on human beings.
well, the cool thing is they don't age. In fact, they will probably get better with time. um,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there will
well,
be no like horse trading or people paying their money, purchasing, influencing. Uh, I'm not sure whether AI can be manipulated that way because depending on the programming or algorithm, it may choose the best way forward, perhaps eliminating any potential risk and dangers. I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Each AI system can be challenged by a adversarial setup, so you can have AI battle itself. And even now, we see things where people are messing with these systems, prompt engineering, what we call Dolly 2 and all these other things, where you can really mess around and get silly answers or things that should have been filtered or caught by the sensors, and they're not. So it's not as robust or as clear cut as and maybe it seems. So.
And hopefully they can eliminate these controversial election results claimed by different parties in what we witness in the United States. Any close counts, any numbers discrepancy in terms of voting, because AI can sufficiently accurately measure and count the votes and eliminate the possibility of, oh, the election was stolen by this many votes, or something is not right. Those pregnant Chad wrong, kind of problems. I'm not sure whether AI is going to uh, be able to help us in those areas which are making election results controversial.
okay, here we go. Next up is from Valerie. China wants to win the battle in core technologies. Global business needs to understand impact on big tech and trade. So Reuters headline says Xi's call to win tech race points to new wave of Chinese state-led spending. Xi calls for China to quote unquote win the battle in core technologies, could signal an overhaul in Beijing's approach to advancing its tech industry. Good luck. Good luck.
Ours, you see, there's nothing else you can see.
Ken
By the
found
way, we didn't mention that he suggested that the zero COVID policy is going to enforce in China. So if those investors heard it, yeah, better run faster.
okay. Next up, Ken found this one that Shasta Lake, California's largest reservoir, is at 33% of capacity due to drought, jeopardizing farmers, cities, small towns, and salmon. Get ready. You've only got a few years left. The always connected. Oh, and Ken found another one from Wall Street Journal about satellite connectivity with phones. It says, what will satellite connected phones do for us? Not much for now, as there are limits. Indeed, it's a very, very, very low bandwidth at the moment. And Ben, you have any projections on when we might actually have any kind of usable?
Um, it's they're up against some pretty serious physical limits there. Um, just bear in mind that like a Starlink antenna is doing a lot, and it's already getting onto the sort of minimum size it can be. It does really clever shit with phased array antennas and steering the beam. So it's effectively like, even though it's solid state and nothing's moving, it's effectively as if the antenna can point itself very rapidly to get the best possible signal. Includes taking advantage of the fact the signal might take a curved path through space, a bit like a ball when you pitch a ball or whatever, depending on the refraction in the atmosphere and all sorts of clever stuff. So they're clever, and to get the bandwidth the Starlink antennas get, you have to be on that order of size. I don't think you can get them 10 times smaller. So a phone can do it, but much, as you say, much lower bandwidth. So I don't think you'll see more than a 10x increase in the phone speed. And I don't think you'll see even as much as a 10x reduction in the size of a Starlink antenna would be my prediction. So, and bear in mind that a phone is like 100 times smaller than a Starlink antenna. So they'll kind of creep towards each other, I would have thought, but I'm not sure they'll meet.
I think because
Um,
of its ability to geolocate and have kind of that fine granularity of position for people on the ground, I think it would be really well suited, for example, for a voting system. If you could have the phones connect to the satellites in places like Africa, there are regions that are not dense, and it would be kind of problematic or difficult to get an efficient, non-corruptible voting system. So I expect one of the first killer apps on Starlink with these satellite phones to be something like a national um, voting system of some sorts. It would be really
yeah,
exciting.
really good idea. Exactly, it's perfectly suited where the population density is low. I mean, bear in mind that Starlink has, even if they get to their full constellation, I think of 12,000 they're aiming for, you'll have a bandwidth for the whole of Manhattan of about 400 megabits, just to give you an idea. So it's really, I'm pretty sure that calculation is correct. I did it the other day. So if everyone on Manhattan tried to use Starlink at the same time, they would have speeds that are slower than the original dial-up modems. You'd have a few hundred bits a second. So it's really, but what is amazing about it is that it's completely global. And uh, so, yeah, I mean, they're the things to bear in mind with the technology. The fundamentals of it are it's about massive connectivity for everybody. I mean, massive numbers of people, massive amounts of area. But if they all cram together, you just can't focus the beams down tight enough to give everybody hundreds of megabits when they're all standing next to each other.
Well,
Um,
transactions would be another thing, right? So voting
yeah,
and
exactly.
transactions.
Yeah, you don't often
Where's
don't
that
need a
killer
lot of
X app?
bandwidth. We don't all have to be streaming shit on Instagram and stuff to be using the internet. You know, financial transactions, voting. There's a lot of things. Just sending location updates. There's a lot of things that use hardly any data. Just think text messages basically uses very, very little. So you can still do a huge amount and achieve a huge amount. And if you are away from a population density, or you're the first people in a city to get Starlink, then you get yourself hundreds of megabits. You might. I've got one just down the road, and a neighbour's got a Starlink for some reason. We can get. He's really close to the ADSL cabinet. He or she can probably get 120 megabits. They're really close to the cabinet, but they've still chosen Starlink, so they're obviously going to get a better service than that, or they wouldn't have bothered because it's more expensive. But if we all did that in the village, then it'd be a tragedy of the. It suffers basically from tragedy of the commons. That's the thing to watch out for. So, but yeah, back to the original question about the handsets. I don't think we're going to see like video streaming on a handset to the satellites anytime soon because of the. It's just to do with the bandwidth and the wavelengths of the signals involved. And the ability to band steer and focus them. So, but it's amazing that you can and have been able to since any 4G phone has been able to communicate this through this protocol to satellites, which is pretty cool. So it can be an absolute lifesaver in the case of that killer SOS feature they brought out. Hey, I've just said multiple sentences without coughing to death. Maybe I'm getting better. Okay, see you soon.
Okay, the next one that I have is from Thomas Tong about cutting edge wearable tech, which has 1,200 tiny solar panels that can charge your phone. Researchers at Nottingham Trent University have invented textiles embedded with more than 1,000 miniature solar cells that can charge a smartwatch. That's pretty freaking cool, I gotta say. Solar powered clothes, making material wearable fabric with tiny, tiny solar panels.
It's cool if you need it. In that it's going to be a lot of complexity and cost and gimmickry when honestly you can have a battery pack and get weeks worth of that. A small battery pack that would fit in your pocket, a phone charging pack the size and weight of your phone would probably have a few weeks of energy that your clothes are going to provide. So it's fantastic if you're out hiking and you need that sort of thing and you don't mind the compromises, but really going to be worth with anything like that. Just looking at it's like these packs, the little battery packs that you get that have a solar panel on them, and they're about the size of a cup, 2 or 3 iPhones stacked back to back, and they have a solar panel. They're like, you can charge this battery pack from the solar panel. Well, you can if you leave it in, Californian sunshine for 3 weeks solid. So, yeah, it's worth just running the numbers in your head about the number of watts and how long things actually take. But where you don't have any other way of charging, it's pretty cool. I think could be amazing for the military as well in their uniforms or something. Perhaps they, out in the field want some extra power.
Oh wow, Cheryl just pinned something wild. Let's go ahead and do this one, Cheryl. Outrage as Boston University creates a COVID strain that has an 80% mortality rate.
They just put that up on the mail.com.
I went to there's a here at Cambridge. There's a in England. There's a Centre for the Study of Existential Risks or something like that. And years ago, well before COVID, but interestingly after Bill Gates had warned us all about the next pandemic, I went to a talk which was about potentially, I don't know, potentially pandemic pathogens or something. And the whole question of the debate, and there were two speakers, geeky chaps, was should we do stuff like this? Should we make potentially lethal viruses in a lab? And one of the guys' arguments was no, we shouldn't, because if they get out, we're all buggered. And he gave an example of where they have got out, where a really, really bad engineered strain like this left a level 3 or 4, whatever it was, facility by post. They thought this thing was deactivated. It rocked up at a very standard lab. They received this stuff and realized it was a weaponized strain and it was not deactivated. And there was a massive hoo-ha about, how could that possibly happen? So that was his argument, is if we do it, we're going to screw up one day and we're all going to die. And the other guy's argument was, well, if we don't do it, then nature's going to make something like this anyway, randomly, as it has in the past and will in the future. And then if we don't do this sort of stuff and study it, then we're all going to die. So I came down in the end on the side of the argument that we probably should do it, but be super freaking careful so that we can, like when SARS came out, for example, and COVID to some extent, sequence it and deal with it quickly. But it is interesting to think about that moral debate. Anyway.
Hurry, eat the tuna before it goes extinct. Wait, what? That's what it sounds like.
I think
Well,
the biggest issue with this, which is mentioned in the article, is that 3/4 of these labs are in urban areas. And I've heard the argument, well, they need to be in urban areas because the people who are doing the research don't want to live in the middle of nowhere, that they've got lives and whatever. But I actually think what if this was actually thought out, you would put these in more remote areas. You would pay these people fortunes of money to live there for a while, so that for their inconvenience of not living in Manhattan or Wuhan or
Those people are
Boston.
unwilling to live in those areas. One of
You
the
keep
biggest
saying
factors in
that.
biotech is location. So, for example, San Diego, Singapore, all these places spend so much money because people want to live in a place that's nice. They don't want to.
Well, you're going to have to find people for the right amount of money. When I said the right amount
it's
of money,
not
pay them.
even about the people. They won't be able to sustain such lab in such a faraway places because the labs are dependent on supplies regularly, and some of the supplies need to be really fresh. Some of the testing materials need to be collected and immediately sent to different labs or locations. They are very time sensitive. They are temperature sensitive. There are so many different aspects, and then the team that need to come and ensure the quality control and temperature management, AC cooling, heating, all these people who need to be there to make sure that the labs are in prime condition of working. Regular checks are needed for that purpose also. So it's not like a closed room where somebody's sitting and working. Hundreds of people come in and out to maintain, ensure the safety of these labs. So not plausible, not workable.
Well,
Plus the
I'm
but you're
just
going to
trying
the
to
have
find
lab
out.
leaks,
I'm
though.
just
You
trying to
know
find
that.
out what the necessity of making more problems in the world that's the least thing that we need right now. I mean, there's so many different things that are out there that are able to kill people at 80%, 90%, 100% kill rate. And, there's so many other problems, whether it's, health problems, whether there's environmental issues, things that we could actually work on and fixing. It's almost like trying to break something else just to see how we can fix it later on. I mean, I understand what Ben was saying about, being prepared for it when and if it gets created, what nature brings up. But at this time, there's so many, and at this time, when all these problems are happening around the world, politics, corruption, I mean, biological warfare. I mean, at this time, I'm still trying to figure out why are we even going into that route instead of actually going the other route and trying to fix what's already been broken instead of keep creating new fissures or new problematic issues or more, health concerns in the world right now. I mean, there's just so many problems right now. There's so many bad actors in this planet right now that it just seems like, one more to the mix. Can we create another one? Yes, of course we could. We could create it. The next one, someone can say, well, I can up that and then, The ones that we created is 90% killed. The one that we created is 99% killed. I mean, it seems like at this rate, of course it's doable, but why are we even going in that route?
No,
Okay,
no,
so
I
the
don't think they're.
is
Oh, sorry,
that
Erin, go ahead.
we are not trying to create. Sorry, Ben, do you want to come in? Sure.
Well, I was just going to say that you're not. I don't think this is a Daily Mail article, so all I would take from it is that Boston University have created a new COVID strain, and yes, sure, it might have more lethality, but I wouldn't read any more into it without going back to the original source, whatever that is. And I would guess if you did that, they're doing it for a very good reason, that they have to probably submit a proposal about the risk of this and all the rest of it. And the very good reason is probably that this gives you the opportunity to understand how we deal with potential. We could only be a few mutations away, natural mutations away from this happening. You mentioned, Neda, in your list of other threats about terrorist bio threats, etc. If we don't do this research, there's a strong argument that we won't be prepared to deal with those things. So
There's
I
this
think,
thing.
yeah,
There's
I
this
think
thing
that
And
these
it's
called
facilities are generally very well protected against it
yeah,
getting
they
out.
are
yeah.
protected.
There's
Plus, they
this
are
thing
not trying
called
to create something.
bioweapon. I'm just wondering, Tyler, is this the reason why Xi Jinping insists on zero COVID strategy? Because he knows something that we don't know.
The point I'm trying to make is it's not like if this COVID strain is created to show that it can kill 80%, it's when it will occur naturally. Since a virus, every time it replicates and jump from one person to another, have the potential to combine with your DNA, the unique sequence, and also to change its own sequence and increase its infectivity. That's why we do have many different strains, and these strains are replicating and they are modifying itself. So, 10 cycles down the line, 100 cycles down the line, the virus will become more dangerous, more virulent, and would be able to kill 80 or 90% of its person that's it's infecting. So it's not like we are creating it right now. It's like we are preparing for something that's coming in the future anyway, because unless we stop the replication of the virus or the the uh, back and forth infection, propagation that's happening, uh, viral will go along and develop these strains. Because virus like to survive, and these labs are preparing, understanding the modes of replication, and trying to perhaps potentially develop measures. Where are the weaknesses, where we can stop it, what are the RNA, DNA, whatever sequencing that can be identified and then become the therapeutic marker, or the infectivity marker, and so on and so forth. There's so much detail that's going on. So idea is not to show that, oh, my virus can kill 80% of the people. It's like the potential of this going to happen in future anyway, but we are preparing ahead of time.
Yeah, we don't know a priori which protein will do what. That's the issue here, that we quite literally have to try each one and see what it does and then make observations. And that process is very tedious because there is no shortcut to knowing what a small modification might do. You quite literally either have to simulate all scenarios, or in most instances, there's animal testing. So, from the perspective of humanity, yeah, it sucks. It's kind of like a necessary evil, although I would say critics say, hey, we need to prepare for a pandemic, and thereby we create a pandemic by it's like one of those arguments. So I think there's some validity to that the general public is concerned. It really doesn't like this stuff. But as Ken suggested, there could be a better way. It could be like a Resident Evil movie where you have a facility deep underground in a city, so the zombies, when they do come out, eventually they come from beneath the city, not at the surface. So you might have some countermeasures or ways of securing it. So, and by zombies, I mean like a virus in this case. So, if we want to be careful, it's kind of weird that safety protocols, oftentimes in labs, the corners are cut. And so there was some discussion that perhaps in the Chinese labs they were cutting corners, and this is just human error. So whenever we do this kind of work, if we can automate it with robots, with machines, and remove the person, not only does that prevent contamination events and outbreaks, but it also makes things much more trustable scientifically speaking because it's reproducible and all these other elements. So there's just a lot of incentives to move towards automation with this kind of research, and that is one way that you could additionally make it safer.
Moving on, and let's pray to God everyone who works at these labs globally who can do these kinds of things. I'm curious how the number of people who could do what this team did at where are they at exactly? Boston University's National Emerging Infectious Diseases Laboratory, so Boston University, and the team of researchers was from Boston and Florida. And what they did was they extracted Omicron's spike protein, and it's kind of a hybrid of Omicron and the original Wuhan variant, where they took the spike protein from Omicron and attached it to the original variant, and it makes it 5 times more virulent than Omicron, which is incredible because Omicron's very virulent, has a very high, R naught factor. So this would be incredibly infectious and seemingly potentially very high mortality rate because mice. This was done on mice where it killed 80% of the mice, and mice don't die from Omicron, but it killed 80% of the mice that got this new hybrid Omicron Wuhan variation. Anyway, the question in my mind is how many people on the planet could have done this? Is it because if it's more than thousands, it only takes one of them with an ill intent who thinks that the planet has too many people and that the solution is to uh, quickly reduce the population rate due to climate change, and then we're in deep doo doo. So, hello from a remote island in Thailand. The next article is from the Wall Street Journal that Japan loves salt. And the government health officials worry all of that salt is driving high blood pressure in Japan. And so they're trying to come up with a way to reduce the intake of salt, but yet salt is so much a part of the flavor in the cuisine and everything, like in even miso soup and everything else. There's a considerable amount of salt, although very little sugar actually relatively. So they're off to a great start. They're just optimizing at this point. But so they figured out a very clever way to have the taste of salt without consuming it. Can anyone imagine what it is? It's very clever. Salt flavored chopsticks.
Oh God.
Wow.
Tricking eaters into tasting salt, and forks and spoons are next. Salt flavored forks and spoons. I love it. I can't wait to try it. It's very funny. The next,
Did they soak the bamboo or the wood in the sea to absorb the salt taste?
I don't know how they do it. The doctors are struggling to diagnose a condition that kills more Americans than stroke. That was from Francine Hardaway, from the Atlantic. Francine Hardaway found, and cancer
And
vaccine.
it's the disease that's killing more people than stroke is sepsis, and
Oh,
it's because they never get it diagnosed early enough.
okay. Cancer vaccine could be available by 2030, says scientists behind the COVID shot. The team who sold their partnered with Pfizer, which was BioNTech, brilliant team there. Cancer vaccines could be accessible to patients within the next decade, the husband and wife team behind one of the most successful COVID vaccines said. Let's let's see that happen. That'd be amazing. Snow Thomas Tong found this. This was a big story going on today. Snow crab season has been canceled. as there are billions of snow crabs have disappeared from the waters around Alaska, where every year there's a massive snow crab hunt for billions of snow crabs that people then eat at Las Vegas buffets. And Ken knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I
Uh,
was going to point it out, by the way. So there actually now are less buffets, not because of a lack of snow crab, for other reasons. So, but you're right on the casino buffets. It makes a big difference. I know a guy who runs a small casino down in Mississippi, and they have a buffet there. And one of the things he was trying to manage even before this happened was the price of snow crab because it was already a shortage. Yeah, but they are very important. For buffets. So probably now more important for cruise lines and for casinos. A lot of casinos, with because of COVID, closed their buffets, and then they decided not to reopen them because they actually lost money on them. They were always priced to lose $1 or $2 a person, and they would always would do it as a loss leader, believing that they needed to have that to bring people in to play the slot machines. And then it turns out people are going to play the slot machines anyway. So bye bye buffets. A lot fewer buffets in Las Vegas now.
hmm.
Yeah, so these crabs actually, scientists think that either disease or the more likely scenario is the climate change. So the waters have gotten sufficiently warmer that a billion of them could have just
Or,
died off. So there's
or
climate for you
they're,
folks.
or just like humans, they're not dating and they're deciding not to have kids.
Also, the water contains different kind of chemicals and drugs like hormones also affect the hormonal cycle of frogs, and so the same thing is happening with like marine animals, because these hormones that are released in the water and sewage and then make it way to the waters affect the aquatic animals hormonal cycle that affect their reproductive cycle.
Okay. Next up is Thomas Tong found this one. A new drug could help livers self-regulate and end organ transplant waits. There is a dearth of organs available for transplantation, but what if instead of liver transplants, there was a drug that could help the liver regenerate itself? And alcoholics everywhere are rejoicing. There might be a new drug to help regenerate your own liver. A Russian oligarch. I can't believe this. This is incredible. Apparently, a Russian gas oligarch dies in a mysterious circumstances.
What about?
Can you believe this? This is wild.
Oh no, unbelievable. That's how oligarchs normally, have in the past met the final fate, very questionable circumstances.
Didn't fall out of a window?
Yeah, just about to ask.
Window or food?
Yeah, window or food, right.
Blast in the car.
So Johan start up a Windows again.
That is so trite. Blast in the car. It's just a cliche.
Almost half of teens are sent unwanted sexual images online. According to the BBC, this is according to a study commissioned by Stormont, which sampled more than 1,016-year-olds who say that half of them are sent unwanted sexual images online. BB found this one. A new breakthrough cancer vaccine could be available by 2030. That's the BioNTech one we just read. Thank you, BB. And Saudamini found this one. Could solar powered headphones be the next must have? And I can tell you that indeed that is in the labs. A friend of mine happens to be the creator of the company that makes all of the Marshall speakers, that people, little Bluetooth speakers people have in their homes, and the Marshall headphones and that whole franchise. It's a good buddy of mine from Stockholm who created that company. And he stepped down from that company a couple of years ago to start a new Tesla's an electric boat company, which you can, like the Tesla of boats, called Xshore. And he one of the things he said he regretted when about leaving the company was they were working on these, and that was 2 years ago. These solar powered big headphones, and he was very excited about those, but he had to move on to other things. But yeah, they're for real. They're in the labs for sure. The next is India plans to work on global crypto rules during the upcoming G20 gathering. As there's going to be the G20, I think it's in Indonesia, isn't it? And Putin and Xi are expected to be there. Sparks are going to fly. And India is going there to talk about global crypto rules. And on that note, the price of Bitcoin, by the way, is very interestingly sitting at a real interesting point of 20,000 USD, where it really doesn't seem to want to go below 20,000. No one seems to want to sell below 20 for quite a while now, going back to like June. And technically, on the chart basis, it looks like it's found its floor. And so I think it's either going to break the floor or it's going to bounce off the floor rather remarkably in either direction. And it's seeming more and more like it's going to bounce. So what you're going to have is all the short sellers getting out of their shorts, and that's going to drive it up. And anyway, so you looks like timing wise with this, if there's an announcement that comes out of the G20 around Bitcoin or a global thing, you could see an interesting rally in Bitcoin happen, like from 20 to 30 quite easily, maybe even 40. So anyway, just a little tip there for you. And
No
Geo,
financial advice, Tyler?
well, it wouldn't matter because it's crypto anyways. So Geo picks Nokia as equipment supplier ahead of planned 5G rollout in India. So India has been saying now in headlines for several days, a week or so, that they're going to roll out 5G in a big way in India. The question is with who? Because there's only a handful of people you can use. And very notably, they're not using Huawei. So they're using Nokia. So kudos to Nokia for that. And that, by the way, you'll remember, if you're a regular tech newser, you've heard me say multiple times, and that headline is far, far, far more interesting than 99.99999% of people realize, including the journalist who wrote it. Because there's a big, as tech newsers know, the big thing happening on planet Earth at the moment, other than climate change, is the disuniting of nations, the great schism between the West and China, and the alliance of China and Russia and Iran, and whoever else they can convince to join them. And the big question in that schism is, who gets the kids? And when I say kids, I mean India. And which side is India going to go with the West or with China and Russia and Iran or what have you? And some people think that India might go with China, Russia, India, because India kind of plays kind of nice at times with Russia when it comes to voting in the UN. And although it's not much of a fan of China at all. But anyway, it's one of the big worries of people who are familiar with what I'm describing, that India might side with them, because then the West might be actually have a tough go of things if India is not joining the West. Now, I've said that the selection of the 5G partner is a really interesting foreshadowing early indicator of which side people will go with. And the fact that India chose to go with West based 5G and not Chinese, because the Chinese stuff is way cheaper, but it has other reasons that you don't want to go with it, is a subtle but potentially very important signal that India is going to go with the West in the big divorce case that's unfolding before us. So that's why I say that headline is incredibly interesting in ways that nearly everybody misses. So the next is that Flipkart, also out of India, launches the Flipverse to offer virtual shopping experience in the metaverse. And an
Hey,
air
Tyler, I was reading, since on a related topic, I was reading that Instacart did another down round. I mean, they've done right. The valuation is slipping, right?
yeah, all of the companies in that category are tumbling rather. I mean, half of them are gone now. By the way,
Because they
um,
got, well, Instacart is different because it delivers groceries and not food. But I had been using Instacart all along. But what has happened during the inflation is that I've stopped because although it's a wonderful convenience, as it got to the point where my food bill had doubled from week to week, I realized that I needed to go to the supermarket. More's the pity.
okay. So, air taxi startup called Skyports opens Japan office ahead of 2025 launch. British air taxi startup provides drone infrastructure and services. Here come the air taxis. Artists say AI image generators are copying their style to make thousands of new images, and it's completely out of their control. Yeah, that's correct. Indeed, it is. And that's it for the big boring headlines for today. Thank you, everybody. Let's do it tomorrow. Ben's got the room open.